So this evening, I am discussing with you bribery and corruption. Bribery and corruption. As we indicated at the beginning of the lecture, we stated that we were going to look at some of the issues. Essentially, the course is about social change. What some of the things that have changed since the 1900s, just for analytical purposes. And so we were looking at these changes in a systemic manner or in an institutional, adopting the institutional approach that we used last semester. And so we started by looking at the political institution. We started by looking at the religious institution. We have looked at the economy. If you look at the family and marriage institution, we have looked at education. We have looked at health. So essentially, we have discussed the primer, right, which were the basic units of the social structure, right? But the second leg looks at what we discuss or we refer to as contemporary issues, issues that did not necessarily feature in the traditional societies, but as we transitioned or as we are transitioning from the traditional society to the much more complex society, it has emerged. So some of these issues are bribery and corruption. Tomorrow, my colleague, Dr. Hemming, will discuss ethnicity and tribalism with you, with the Wednesday group. And then finally on Thursday, I will also discuss what we, the sociologists, refer to as social stratification. That is a hierarchical order of individuals, of communities, of members, based on various criteria. One of the main criteria that we use is social inequality, that is access to certain resources. And so, for example, we'll be looking at education and how education creates stratification. We'll even be looking at traditional way of stratification. So traditionally, the older you are, the more respected, the more resources that are usually made available to you. And in that order, right? So there's that, and that will be the last discussion for the semester. As we indicated, then we are going to use the last week for the face-to-face interaction. I am not sure whether we will do it on Tuesday in the evening. Unless there's an exceptional case, I will request that we meet. So you decide which of the other 2 days, the early morning, which is on Wednesday at 7:30, or the late mornings, the 9:30 to the 11:30 on Thursday. So Tuesday group evening may have to decide, depending on how your schedule looks like, to join any of these 2, so we can have a face-to-face interaction for 2 hours. My intention or our intention is to open up the space to walk you through all the issues that we have discussed throughout the 13 weeks, the 13 sections. And as sometimes I indicated, the understanding I am getting is that sometimes your questions are more related to the lectures that were recorded and made available to you. But at that forum, I will take the time and go through all the 13 lectures with you. And so I advise that students do not miss it. The last thing, and I'm sure many of you have done the course evaluation and course as if you haven't, kindly do it. Else I will be unable to offer you your grade. The system has been built in such a way that unless you confirm your registration, it will become very difficult for us to assess and then input your grade. So kindly make sure you go through the system and evaluate the course. So there are two levels of evaluation. You first evaluate the course in terms of content, delivery, and all that. And the second will be to evaluate the instructor, in this case, myself or Dr. or Hemi. You kindly go there and get it done. Thank you. So I'm sure for many of you, corruption isn't a new thing. You've heard it, corruption and bribery here and there. It's become very topical in this country anytime the partisan actors get involved. And even currently, there are some civil society organizations whose prime focus has been on how corruption, is to throw light on corruption or to report on corruption. Even though sometimes we misuse words, today we're going to look at the distinctions between bribery and corruption, understand really what constitutes corruption. Is every act that is not pleasant corruption? Can every act that is deemed not right be rightly described as corruption? And in what forms or shape does corruption take? And why is corruption an issue that needs to be talked about? Or why is it that we talk about corruption and other corrupted relation activities? So essentially, I'm going to help you to come to define what bribery and corruption are. We will look at the types of corruption, and then we will subject this whole discussion. People are saying that the human being is generally corrupt, but within the Ghanaian sector, are there certain practices or factors that predisposes Ghanaians to be corrupt? And what are the consequences of corruption, as well as how can corruption and other related issues be addressed? So the first thing I talk to you about is what is bribery and corruption. And one of the things that all of us have to understand about corruption, especially within the political space, is that almost every government from independence have always been accused of corruption. And when they lose power, one of the reasons why they lost power, and sometimes most central to they losing elections, has always been the perception of they being corrupt and all that. So in 1975, a national commission headed by one Justice Enin was set up to investigate and to come out with how certain corrupt practices took place and how it can be remedied and how all other possibilities could be done. And he sought to merge the two, which is bribery and corruption. And he defines it as the giving and receiving of a gift or a valuable consideration. So it's a gift or a valuable consideration, either in cash or in kind, with the object of influencing the person in a position of trust to act in a manner or in a way favorable to the giver. So the Enin Commission merged corruption and bribery together and says that it is the giving and receiving of a gift or a valuable consideration. Okay, and this valuable consideration could either be in cash or in kind, with the intention of influencing the receiver, okay, who normally happens to be in the position of trust to act in a way that is favorable to the giver. And so for the Enin Commission, essentially, for bribery to take place, for corruption to take place, there ought to be a giver, right? There ought to be a giver. Okay, but as we go along, we will realize that it is not every corrupt act that there will be a known or identifiable giver, right? So that is one. In our Ghanaian context, the term bribery and corruption has been christened in many ways. So in the early days, one of the key terms that were used to describe corruption or bribery and corruption was kalabule. Later, another term, awam. And literally, awam was an association of West African merchants, essentially like foreign West African residents who were into buying and selling, formed association, because in the early days, Ghana, the economy was booming and many people wanted to take advantage. And so they had formed association. The reason why the awam became equivalent to corruption was the fact that there were shortages of essentials. So the daily essentials, milk, Milo, and all the things that the basic needs that people needed. And these guys will hoard them and then sell them at exorbitant prices, right? So essentially, when they were talking about awam, it was just trying to say that these guys were just hoarding and selling at an inflated figures just so they can make greater gains from their business. Currently, corruption is also equated to 419. And in some ways, currently, corruption is being rebranded. And so people who are corrupt are now sometimes says that they are smart. And so they are bold to say that they outsmarted somebody. How? Because something that was meant to, for example, to be sold for 10 cedis, they are selling it for 20,000 Ghana cedis, or 20 or 15 and all that. So essentially, these are some of the things that you want to do. But beyond the earning analysis, other researchers have also sought to separate bribe from corruption. And so one of the things that they also talk about is the fact that a bribe is a gift or anything offered to procure an illegal action or decision in the favor of the giver. In other words, we can deal with you as a giver and not necessarily because there's a receiver. But what is essentially, a gift is seen as bribe constituting crime when that gift is offered to procure an illegal action. Okay, so how can it, and everybody is a potential bribe giver. So for example, I drive on the shoulders of the road when I'm not supposed to. The police then arrest me and immediately tells me that they are preparing me for court. And then I pull out 50 cedis and I give it to the policeman. I say, come on, let's settle this here. And the policeman is convinced and he takes the 50 Ghana cedis. I have bribed him because I've given him something to procure an illegal action. Why is it an illegal action? Because the police is not mandated to be taking money from pedestrians or from drivers, right? And because he took the money and decided to bend the rules, because the rules is that if you arrested me for reckless driving, you process me for court. But he bends the rule or takes an action that he is not permitted to take to favor me, then we can say that it is a bribe, right? But the police officer then has been corrupted, so he has engaged in corruption, right? And so if you go back to the first definition, there's a point that is very critical that we must not lose sight of. It talks about somebody, a person in a position of trust. So that for the police person who took the money is in a position of trust, is in a commanding position, a position that is expected to act in the good of the nation. But in this case, he didn't. He only acted in the good of his pockets, and right? Good. So Nukunya also attempts a definition, and it says that it's money or anything offered to procure illegal or dishonest action or decision in favor of the giver, similar to the first definition there. It's just that this time around, he explains it by just being explicit by introducing the word money, right? But illegal and the dishonest action in favor of the giver is almost the same, right? Right. Okay. Please, if there's a question, you can ask. So the first question everybody wants to ask: why will people give bribe? And the answer is very simple. Bribe is given so the law will be broken or the rules will be bent in favor of the giver, right? So there are 100 people who are applying for a particular job, and there are 2 people who are supposed to be selected. You are not sure whether you'll be among the 2, but you want the job. So you go and offer that person and say, come on, I promise to give you my first 3 months salary if you facilitate my appointment. Sometimes we know that some of these bribes are demanded, right? In fact, even the example about the police, there have been instances where the police have been caught negotiating for the bribe, okay? There are instances where people who are in a position of trust have demanded sex from women. Even now, with the activities of LGBT and the rest, there have been instances where men have also demanded sex from their fellow men, all in a way of trying to bend the rules, right? But again, the one who is demanding in this context could not be said to be bribing, but rather he is corrupting, right? So the crux of the problem, essentially, is that the people who are in a position of trust are paid, right, for doing their legitimate duty. And under normal circumstances, they are not expected to demand certain benefits from the one they are providing the service for, right? And so that is why it becomes an issue, right? So I am being paid as a lecturer. Yes, I might not be satisfied with how much I am being paid. I may decide that I may go on demonstration or I may strike to demand for an upward review of my condition of service. But until that is done, and so long as I remain in the field and I am working, under no circumstances should I demand, do you understand, for certain incentives, especially for the service receivers, in order to render what legitimately I'm expected to do. What are my legitimate duties? My legitimate duties include showing up for lectures and instructing. My legitimate duties include grading students. My legitimate duties include supervising students. My legitimate duties include writing articles and publishing them, right? So if, because I feel I am dissatisfied, I make a demand on the service receiver in order to render what legitimately I am expected to do and for which every month I am paid, then I am engaged in corruption. And if any other person makes an attempt to influence that decision, so sometimes students, I laugh, you pick a particular student paper, and instead of they concentrating on the paper and writing and responding to the questions, they'll be writing you very interesting letters. Why? Some promising sex, some promising money, some promising a lot. In fact, there have been instances where I have gone into my PG hole only to see money, only to see some material gains, gifts in there. And you pretend as if you haven't received it. 3 or 4 days later, that person shows up and says, yes, I was the one who did this. And just after that, they begin to demand a favor from you. If you are involved or if you are contemplating on that, that act is called an act of bribery. And if I connive and I take that gift, and on the basis of that gift, I begin to massage your report, I begin to massage your grade, I begin to do something in your favor, then I'm also engaged in corruption. So essentially, according to Lippmann 1975, corruption then is the intentional, and look at the words that has been highlighted, intentional misperformance or neglect of a recognized duty, or the unwarranted exercise of power with the motive of gaining some advantage, more or less directly personal. Now, let me go back to the examples I gave you as my legitimate duty. So what are my legitimate duties? My legitimate duties include instruction, examining, setting questions, supervising, and teaching, right? So instead of coming to teach you for the 13 weeks, I decided that I will not show up for the 13 weeks. I show up for 10 weeks. And also threaten you that the 3 weeks that I didn't come and the topics that were supposed to be discussed are the areas I'm going to examine you, right? And then says that, okay, but I'll still be available. If you have time, you can come. What am I doing? I am intentionally misperforming my duties. Why? Because I'm skipping 3, and I know that because you have not covered the 3, when I say I'm not teaching it, but that is the same area, then you people will be trooping in. And then I'll tell you that, no, I mean, my job is done, the 13 we already been covered and all that. And so what I'm doing is my private activities, and you may have to pay for it, right? Or alternatively, I'm supposed to supervise, I won't supervise you. I'll just create problems for you. You write this one, say it's terrible, go and do this, and then you'll be so frustrated. Why? And when I make you so frustrated, then I'll show you a way of getting around it, including paying me money so that I get it done for you, right? So people will intentionally misperform. So it's like you go to some ministries, they will intentionally not show up any, then they will threaten you with closure and all that. And on the basis of that, because you also need your particular document to be pushed or to be moved, you are forced to bribe them or make some offer so they are able to get whatever it is that they want to do. And so these are the 3 ways. The third one, which is actually very critical, is the unwarranted exercise of power. So for example, so I'm teaching you 2 to 4, but I intentionally then go and make certain arrangements so I can tamper with your resource in 2 to 3, simply because I know you, or simply because you have made some very interesting offer for me. I have no reason in tampering with SOCI 2 to 3 because I am not the examiner, or 2 to 2. I'm not the examiner there. Do you get it? So unwarranted exercise of power. It is not for me to do that. Or there have been instances where lecturers have written people's exam or written people's essays for them. That power, yes, I have a power, but I am exercising it in an unwarranted manner, right? But if I am doing all that because I want to gain some advantage, and according to Lippmann, that is corruption, right? people then simply then say that, okay, it is the abuse of public office for private gain. And this can be direct or indirect, as I have discussed with you so far. Any question up to this stage? Any question up to this stage? Hey, people, corruption should be a topic that we all talk about. I don't know why everybody is silent. Any question? Okay, let me continue. So we are saying that and corruption can also take place in different forms. The first form that corruption sometimes do take is cronyism. Cronies are people that you know, you may be in certain cliques with them. So like friends, acquaintances, old schoolism and all that, these are friends that you share with, right? And when you see people surrounding themselves with all these people, then there's a likelihood of corruption also taking place. It will also be in nepotism, and nepotism are the same as like favoritism, right? It's also connected to you and the likes. It can also take the form of embezzlement. Embezzlement essentially is like stealing. Okay, so they've given you 1,000 cedis to go and buy something. You don't go and buy it and then you pocket it. Another one is also misappropriation of fund. Misappropriation actually can take various forms. Misappropriation just means that what the money was meant for, you didn't use it for. But one, unlike embezzlement, you have not taken the money, but you have used it to do something else. So you have misapplied the money. So you are giving 10,000 to go and build a school, right? Instead of going to build a school, you decided to go and build KVIP. You have misapplied the money based on the original intention for which the money was given to you. It may be corruption, but sometimes misappropriation may not necessarily be corruption. It may just be a way of people being a bit more responsive to emergencies. But the truth of the matter is that the money has been misapplied. As when we come to the public space, there are laid down procedures where money is meant for, money is already apportioned for a particular action can be changed. So it is catered for. But if you don't do that, then it becomes misappropriation and may be open. And the reason why people say that it opens up for corruption, because by deciding not to do what has been agreed and going to do something, you have denied the original people the benefit of the money that was allocated to you. Extortion, we have already talked about, where the police will be demanding, when lecturers will be demanding. And fraud. Fraud is when you take illegitimate means to get certain things, okay, from it. Yeah, so essentially. Corruption can also be at levels, and I will use I'll talk to you about the standardized one by the CPI or the Transparency International approach. But essentially, it can be at the individual level. So it could be me just engaging in that. It could be an organized group. So, for example, recently during the COVID, my department used to have this where if you needed a reference, okay, you go to my department, you first have to come and talk to any of the lecturers. And if the lecturer agrees to write the reference for you, then you go to the department and go and do a registration. And I think you used to pay about 30 cedis or so. Right. Then that was it. During the COVID, the university decided that they were stopping those charges. So I think they sent a circular that all such charges must be stopped. So if you see me demanding money as a lecturer to write reference, I may be involved in corruption but that corruption is at the individual level. Okay, but when it comes, and then you realize that it's not only me, but the entire department is involved, then it can be at an organized groups level. Okay. Then if it so happens that the entire university is also involved in an act, then we can also move to the next level to say that it has become a top level thing. So the university itself is doing it. So the CEO, the vice chancellor, and all that. So that is one way of looking at this. Is there any question up to this stage? Or I should just continue? Okay, if there are no questions, I'm going to continue. So one of the very important agencies that has over the years exposed